So hi, here we are walking the ground, literally where I started this morning and started the talk this morning. So forgive me if you've already heard some of this stuff. I just wanted to make sure that I got through all the information that was on my cards and in my notes. So if you hear background noise such as this, that will be me literally tearing through my notes as I go through them. So we were out here today talking about the 28th Virginia in Pickett's charge. So the 28th Virginia, there goes the camera. It's a little windy out here today. So the 28th Virginia is an individual single regiment. We talked about why we focused on single regiments. It allows us to, instead of focusing on armies and corps and divisions and just generals like Lee and Meade and Longstreet and Hancock, instead of just focusing on those, it allows us to get down to a more intimate level with a small body of men, a band of brothers in a sense. So earlier this year we did a tour and we talked about the 16th Maine, the bloody 16th Union regiment, way out on the right of the Union line on the first day of battle, and how they were absolutely completely overrun and almost wiped out as a unit, fighting as part of the Union rearguard that morning. And we've also been out to Barlow's Knoll and talked about the individual regiments and artillery batteries out there that day, such as Dilger's battery. We talked about a single battery of Ohio artillery and their individual participation in the battle as part of an overall view. It allows us to get down to that. It allows us to look at individual men, their responses to conflict, their responses to battle. It allows us to look at the terrain that those individual regiments walked across and fought for. So instead of just talking about in the abstract of like, oh, Devil's Den and the wheat field and the peach orchard, when you come out to, so I'm at Spangler's Woods. This is Spangler's Woods behind me. We're talking about Pickett's charge. Pickett had 3 brigades with him present on that day. Garnett's brigade, Kemper's brigade, Armistead's brigade. And right out of this corner of woods here, this is where Richard Garnett's brigade, the Gamecock brigade, came out in line of battle about 3 o'clock that afternoon, July the 3rd, and began their attack towards their march rather than a charge, over about a mile towards the Union line. So coming out here and literally standing on the ground that these men were on, and then, as we did this morning or attempted to do, walking the ground across what, if you looked at a movie and you looked at a movie of Pickett's charge, they're just moving across, they're having cannon fired at them. When you look at the ground carefully, from either up here on Seminary Ridge or over there on top Cemetery Ridge, where they have 2 bridges that are so similar to each other in phonetic. Anyway, when you look at the ground, you can see that it does dip. There's right in front of me here is a drainage swale. If you're marching, you're going to go down into a drainage swale, and you're going to be hidden from view of the Union artillery. And then you're going to come up out of the drainage swale, and you'll be visible again and attract more artillery. Then you're going to dip over there in that corner. You're going to cross a split rail fence, which means you've either got to concentrate in a small area to get through a gap or climb over the fence, presenting yourself as another artillery target. When you've crossed the road, there's actually a dip where you're slightly out of view coming across the Emmetsburg pike, in which rifle fire would not be hitting you, and then you come up and then you're getting the full effect of rifle fire. So when you come out and you walk the ground, you see the importance of terrain to the 28th Virginia in the assault, and the Union defenders at the wall in the defence. And you also see, when you're over there, you actually see, I understand now why the Vermont Brigade crossed the wall and came on the flank of the attackers. They could fire into the flank. It was a completely open flank, and they could get around on the terrain and flank them. So when we look at battles, I like to do, sometimes I do an overview, but a lot of the time now I like to dig into the history of an individual regiment, such as the 28th Virginia, talk about the men in that regiment and what happened to them on that day, and make it a more Personal story, not my personal story, but instead of just talking in an overview, we can talk about, oh gosh, this wind would have been beautiful this morning. It would have been absolutely beautiful this morning, but well, here it is this evening. So, in fact, it's been so hot and humid, I wouldn't be surprised if we got thunderstorms in about an hour. So I better get a move on. So the 28th Virginia, they're a regiment raised in the south of Virginia, around the Roanoke area. They fought from first Manassas, so first Bull Run, all the way through to Appomattox, so they're there in all the major battles, well, most of the major battles of the Eastern Theatre. They're there at the surrender at Appomattox. When you think of what an infantry regiment's authorised strength is, 800, maybe 1,000. At the end in at Appomattox, the 28th Virginia had not 800 men left, not 400, not 50%, not 400 men left. They had 3 officers and 51 men present for duty. So 54 men was all that was left in active service of this particular regiment at the end of the war. The regiment was commanded at Gettysburg that day by Colonel Robert Allen. He was Virginia Military Institute, VMI, class of 1855. Worked in Roanoke as a lawyer, so as an attorney. You'll find quite often that the political appointments by governors to command, because a governor appoints typically commanders of state regiments. Quite often there'll be lawyers, politicians, university professors, if you want to talk about Joshua Chamberlain. But in this case, Robert Allen was educated at VMI, did not go into serve then in the United States Army, but served as a prominent local lawyer in Roanoke. So he is appointed to command of the regiment. Other men in the unit, regimental chaplain Peter Tinsley. Believe he was an Episcopalian. He was noted by the men in the regiment for always being at the front with the men. So he wasn't a guy that shirked around in the wagon lines. He wasn't just showed up on Sunday to preach. He was a guy that was there with them all the time and shared their hardships. That was the Reverend Tinsley. We've got individual men, like I talked about this morning, Private Samuel Obenchain of Company A. He's the man that he was getting tired. He didn't want to desert because, that's a coward's way out. That's a dishonourable way out of military service, would be to desert, go absent without leave. So he wrote home to his cousin, offering his cousin $100. That's a tidy sum in 1863. He offered him $100 if he would agree to come to the Army of Northern Virginia, serve as a substitute for Samuel, and that would allow Samuel to go home on furlough and have some time at home and spend time at home with the family. Perhaps wisely, his cousin refused that offer. I mean, $100 was a lot of money, but $100 also would then mean that you were going to get shot at by cannon, and so the cousin refused that offer. But nice try, Samuel. So I chose this particular regiment, the 28th Virginia, because to me it will then represent the other men in Garnett's brigade, and it will represent the other men in Pickett's other brigades, and also then Pettigrew's division and Trimble's division. So the 28th Virginia I'm looking at individually, but it's representative for me as a whole of all the other regiments that fought on that day. So we wanted to talk about the higher-ups. I'm getting buzzed by flies. This Gettysburg battlefield for me this year, I've been 9 times to this battlefield this year. This is my 9th time at the battlefield. I'm doing tours. It has been mostly ticks, deer ticks in tick season, so it wouldn't surprise me if I got a few of those. But this evening, the flies are out in force, so they're buzzing me, and I'm just going to have to try and ignore them unless one lands in my mouth. So I want to talk about the higher-ups. We have George Pickett, whose division this is, the 28th in his division. You remember him. He's portrayed by Stephen Lang in the Ted Turner 1993 movie Gettysburg. If you have a copy of that, or you've seen a copy of that, go onto Amazon and watch the director's cut. It has some additional footage in it, which makes it an even longer movie. But it adds just little bits extra to most of the scenes, and it makes it a much better story. You get a little bit more depth to some of the action that takes place, and some of the character development is a little bit better because it's some extended scenes there. So if you find that, it's on Amazon. You can buy it on Amazon and save it on Amazon for, like, I believe $13.99, something like that. But anyway, well worth it if you are a Civil War aficionado and you've already watched the Gettysburg movie and you loved it and you want to watch it some more. Then go get the extended cut of that movie, the director's cut. So George Pickett, as I said, played by Stephen Lang. Pickett himself was Virginia born and bred. He was a graduate of West Point, an appointment to West Point. There's a apocryphal story that he was appointed to West Point by Congressman Abraham Lincoln, but Lincoln was by that point no longer a congressman. So, however, he was appointed by Lincoln's law partner. So there's a Pickett-Lincoln connection, tenuous, but it's there. Anyway, he was a cadet at West Point, where he was notable for his style, his elan, his dress sense, his courtesy and Virginia manners, and also his practical jokes and demerits, his number of demerits. And he finished and graduated as the GOAT of the class, 59th out of 59th out of 59 cadets. He finished dead last. In a way, that's not bad. I mean, he still graduated. I mean, Custer was also the GOAT of his graduating class, finished dead last in his class. So you can finish dead last and still end up as a general. Pickett was a veteran, so he graduated in 1846. The war with Mexico was very soon after that. He fought in the war in Mexico. He's the man that carried the United States colours over the walls at Chapultepec, over the parapet, and waved those flags from the parapet. So he was a man that did not lack personal courage. No one could ever accuse Pickett of lacking personal courage. After that Mexican War, he served in the antebellum period. He served in Texas on the frontier, fighting Indians, and he served in the Washington Territory. So that Northwest Territory, the Washington Territory wasn't a state at that point. If you want a fun Pickett story, Google the Pig War, a territorial dispute between Britain and the United States over some islands in the Northwest Territorial area that were disputed by the Hudson Bay Company and by the United States, in which a farmer's pig that was eating potatoes was shot, and then George Pickett was dispatched with some infantry to stake a claim on behalf of the United States government for this territory. It almost came to a shooting war over a pig. So have a Google of that. I believe there's an omnibus podcast on the pig war. So if you want to listen to Ken Jennings and John Roderick talk about that, that'd be fun too. Anyway, so that was just an aside on Pickett and some of the activity that he got up to. So like a genuine war hero from Chapultepec, and also the wackiness of almost fighting a war over a pig. So he resigned his commission in 1861, as so many other Southern officers did. Resigned his commission in the United States Army, headed back to Virginia, his home state, offered his services to the state of Virginia. He was appointed as a colonel of artillery in the Department of Fredericksburg. So as a professional military soldier at West Point, he'd been trained in artillery tactics, he'd been trained in infantry tactics, he'd been trained in engineering. And so you could appoint a volunteer officer to lead an infantry regiment, which is basically, you can learn this from a drill manual by Hardy, but like the practicality of timing a fuse and elevating cannon and judging distance is, that's an art and a skill that you have to learn. So that's the reason why a lot of these guys were initially placed in command of artillery units as the Confederate artillery was expanding. So, but then he soon becomes a brigadier general of infantry, commanding an infantry brigade in Longstreet's division, when Longstreet is still a divisional commander. When Longstreet is promoted and receives corps command, Pickett becomes a divisional commander, promoted to major general, and becomes a divisional commander in Longstreet's corps. So, in the summer of '63, which we're talking about Gettysburg, one of the brigades in Pickett's division, the Gamecock Brigade, which had been Pickett's own brigade, is commanded by a gentleman called Richard Brooke Garnett. Garnett's another native-born son of Virginia, born in Essex County, Virginia. He's another graduate of West Point, a little bit older than Pickett. He's a graduate of the class of 1841, where he finished 29th. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 6th Infantry, and he went south to fight in the Seminole Wars in Florida against the Seminole Native Americans down there. And he served with the 6th Infantry for 20 years before the war. So 1841 to 1861, just served with that one regiment, the 6th Infantry. That included service as a staff officer and first lieutenant during the Mexican War. Then he went on to serve in the West, promoted to captain. He commanded the garrison at Fort Laramie in the Wyoming Territory. You can visit Fort Laramie today. It's a National Historic Site with some reconstructed buildings. They have great living history programs during the summer. In fact, it's still the summer now, so if you're going out west, go to Fort Laramie and see them fire their Springfield carbines and let off that howitzer. He was staff, so commanded the Fort Laramie in the Wyoming Territory, which at the time was Lakota, Native American Lakota Nation territory. Garnett also resigned his commission in 1861, returned to Virginia to serve in the Confederate Army. He too was appointed to the artillery. He was appointed as a major of artillery. Then he served as a lieutenant colonel in Cobb's Georgia Legion. And then he was appointed to command the 1st Brigade in the Valley District. That's the old Stonewall Brigade. So at the first Battle of Manassas, Bull Run, where Thomas Jackson is commanding a brigade, it's the Valley Brigade, he calls it. After the Battle of Manassas, where General B, says there stands Jackson like a stone wall, rally behind the Virginians, the brigade earns the nickname the Stonewall Brigade, and obviously Jackson earns the nickname Stonewall Jackson. So Garnett is appointed when Jackson is obviously promoted to division commander and then commander of the Valley District. Garnett is appointed to command Jackson's old brigade, the Stonewall Brigade, which goes well, but then we have a mishap. At the Battle of Kearnstown in 1862, Garnett's got that brigade and he's surrounded on 3 sides. He's outnumbered, he's low on ammunition, and he has to decide what to do. If it was Jackson himself, Jackson would be like him with the bayonet, because Jackson was mad for giving them the cold steel. But Garnett had no desire to have this brigade completely wiped out in a futile bayonet charge against overwhelming forces, and he didn't want to try and hold the ground without artillery support and just be shot to pieces from 3 sides. So Garnett exercises breaks contact with the enemy. So he's in contact with the enemy, in combat with them. He has to break contact, very difficult, and withdraw that brigade under fire, which he does successfully. However, Stonewall Jackson himself is a little bit upset. He accuses Garnett of neglect of duty. Doesn't outright accuse him of cowardice, but he calls it neglect of duty, and he has him placed under arrest. Holds a court-martial, and the only people at the court-martial called as witnesses are Stonewall Jackson and Stonewall Jackson's military aide. So Garnett has the impression that he's being railroaded and not unfairly treated, and that he's not being given any opportunity to defend himself. Luckily for Garnett, General Robert E. Lee intervenes personally. He orders Garnett's release, and he takes him out of Jackson's department, and he reassigns him to Longstreet's corps. So when Pickett has been promoted to divisional command, Garnett takes over command of the Gamecock Brigade, Pickett's old brigade, and he commands that brigade at Antietam, where he acquits himself adequately. But there was still in Garnett's mind, whether other officers believed this as well, but Garnett felt that he'd been treated unfairly by Jackson, that he'd essentially been accused of cowardice, and that this cloud was hanging over him, because although he'd been ordered freed from arrest by General Lee, he hadn't been given an opportunity to clear his name in a court of honour, and that weighed heavily on his mind. Garnett and his brigade did not participate in the action at Chancellorsville earlier in 1863. Pickett's division was one of those that was south of the James at that point, investing a Union garrison, siege lines at a Union garrison in Suffolk, Virginia, home of Smithfield Ham, if you've ever visited. But that was being held by a Union force at the time, and Pickett's was one of the divisions, and Garnett's was one of the brigades that was down there as part of that siege force. So he didn't participate, that division didn't participate in the Battle of Chancellorsville. As we know, at the Battle of Chancellorsville, for those of you who've watched the Gods and Generals movie, keep coming back to Ted Turner and TNT, but for those of you who've seen that movie or have read the Stephen Sears book or any other good book, or visited the battlefield even down there at Fredericksburg, the Battle of Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson is shot in a blue-on-blue in a friendly fire attack. At night he's shot down and will die of those, not necessarily of those wounds, but he catches pneumonia and dies of pneumonia. So when Jackson dies, Garnett sets aside any animosity he has towards Jackson, and he actually acts as a pallbearer. He's one of the pallbearers at Jackson's funeral. So when the Army of Northern Virginia moves north in the summer of 1863, Pickett's division is reattached to Longstreet's corps, and Garnett's brigade within that division, they're part of the Army of Northern Virginia, moving north into Pennsylvania. At that point, Garnett was actually ill. He was suffering from a kick. His horse had kicked him in the leg and given him a mighty blow. If you've ever been kicked by a horse, you'll know it. So he also had a fever, possibly from a cold, possibly from internal infection on the wound itself. We don't know, because subsequent events we'll talk about. So he was actually unable to stand for any sustained period of time and unable to walk. So he could get around okay on his horse. He had a favourite bay gelding named Red Eye. He could get around okay on his horse, which was fine. He was a field officer. He felt that he should be on a horse where his men could see him. So he could get around the battlefield, but he wasn't conspicuous. Another brigade commander such as Armistead may move on foot, but Garnett had no choice. He had to be on a horse. And it was like that, mounted very conspicuously, that he led his brigade out of Spangler's Woods on the afternoon of July the 3rd. His brigade comprised 5 infantry regiments. There was the 8th Virginia, under, I'm going to read this from my notes because these are just facts I'm never going to remember. So, Colonel Epper Hunton's 8th Virginia, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Carrington's 18th Virginia, Colonel Henry Gant's 19th Virginia, Colonel Allen's 28th Virginia, and I think we're missing one. Oh yeah, Colonel William Stewart's 56th Virginia. So 5 regiments, a paper strength. Each company should be about 100 men. There should be 10 companies to a regiment, so a regiment should be around about 1,000 men. But these were not full-strength regiments in 1863. That ideal of 10 companies, each of 100 men, was something that a regimental adjutant, your S1, would only dream about having that number of personnel available. So these regiments had been reduced by 2 years of hard fighting. They'd had men killed, maimed, captured, dead or debilitated of diseases, desertions, and most of the regiments were at about 30% strength, some even less. So, for example, the 18th Virginia had 312 men present for duty. I'm going by Atkins figures. And the 28th Virginia had 333, but the 8th only had 193. So these were under-strength units. And in total, Garnett's brigade numbered 1,459 men present for duty. So I'm going to round that to 1,400 when I talk about them, because it's easy for me to remember 1,400. So that was about 29% of its fully authorised strength of 5,000 men. He could have had 5,000 men with those 5 regiments. Instead, he had 1,400. So Pickett's division, coming up from south of the James, had been in the rear of the army. It had been the Army's rear guard on their move north into Pennsylvania, and therefore it was the last to reach the field of battle here at Gettysburg. The division arrived on the night of July the 2nd, so there'd been 2 days of fighting already, and the men knew that they were the fresh division, they were the fresh meat on the battlefield, and they knew that they would be put into combat the next day. They were the only unbloodied division, they were the one that had not been pounded for 2 days, so they knew that they were going to be used. And on July the 3rd. So Pickett's overall division was also under strength. Normally he would have 5 brigades under his command in his division. It was a large division with 5 brigades. He only had 3 here on that day: Kemper's, Armistead's and Garnett's. He had 2 other brigades, Corse and Jenkins, but they'd been detailed away from him to the defences of Richmond, because although Lee moved north and expected the Army of the Potomac and the Union Army to chase him and fight a battle up here in the north, he was still worried that somebody might launch a sneak attack on Richmond. And so amongst the troops he'd left to defend Richmond itself, the Confederate capital in Virginia, were 2 brigades from Pickett's division. So Pickett's division had 3 brigades here on the morning, and that division numbered around 5,400 men, so less than 6,000 men in the division. And that's what they're going to battle with. So anyway, let's go back to the 28th Virginia, because we want to talk about that specific regiment. The 28th Virginia, at the beginning of June, the regiment was camped at Culpeper, Virginia, part of Longstreet's Corps, awaiting instructions for the march north. The 28th Virginia, with the rest of the Corps, just taking a hydration break here, if you'll just bear with me. The 28th Virginia, with the rest of the Corps, moved into the Blue Ridge, up the Shenandoah Valley, which then becomes, when you cross over, becomes the Cumberland Valley, and you come up towards Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. They moved north in the wake of Ewell's Corps, so Richard Ewell, and they crossed the Potomac, moved through that little narrow bend of, if you're familiar with, I believe, 81, Interstate 81, there's that little narrow bend where you come through at Cumberland, Maryland, and suddenly, before you realise that you're in Maryland, you're in Pennsylvania all of a sudden. So it took 20 days of marching to get from Culpeper Courthouse to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, with good traffic. Where am I at Gettysburg today? With good traffic, I could probably get to Culpeper Courthouse within a day driving, no matter the misery of Interstate 95 around that Quantico area where it's just miserable at the moment, where they're putting in that HOV lane. Not that I drive from battlefield to battlefield all the time, but you get to know where the roadworks are going to be. So it's 20 days marching on foot. So no one's riding in the back of a 2.5-ton truck. No one's riding on a train. No one's being flown up here by helicopter. No one's riding in a wagon or riding on a horse. These are infantrymen, and they are marching on foot all the way from Virginia up here, and it's for 20 days on foot march. So you can imagine the state of their feet, you can imagine the state of their shoes, their boots. You can imagine not many of those men would have had a chance to bathe, so 20 days on the road marching, they would have smelt a little ripe as well. Their diet on the road was either the usual ration of hardtack, bacon, coffee substitute, cornmeal, and then whatever they could procure from the local population, which they'd pay for. They didn't steal, they paid for. They paid for, obviously, with Confederate paper script, which was not worth a damn up here in Pennsylvania, if you pardon my language. So Pickett's division was the rear guard of the army, as I said. It had taken them time to come up. They were at bivouac. 28th were at bivouac at Chambersburg on July the 1st. At 2 a.m. on July the 2nd, they were on their feet and moving towards Gettysburg. Now that's a 24-mile march. The temperature was in the high 80s. They had little access to water, so you know that men were dropping out along the way. I walked this 1 mile across here today in slightly higher temperatures, and I consumed 4.5 litres of water while crossing this 1 mile of terrain today, keeping myself well hydrated. But 24 miles in the heat, summer heat, and the humidity that you get here in the mid-Atlantic region. So they reached the field around 2 p.m. in the afternoon. That's a good pace, 2 miles an hour. That's fairly decent. And at that point, General Hood and General McLaws divisions of Longstreet's Corps were still engaged over at Round Top, Devil's Den, and Longstreet thought about immediately putting Pickett's men in as a reserve, like throwing them into that fight. But they just marched 24 miles. So they were the fresh men, but they'd marched 24 miles. They needed to rest. So even though Longstreet was contemplating this, he discussed it with Robert E. Lee, and they decided that they would keep Pickett's Virginians in reserve and rest them, and so they would be fresh for July the 3rd. So the 3 brigades bivouacked almost in battle line behind us there on Seminary Ridge, while Lee and Longstreet formulated that plan for July the 3rd for the attack. So the attack would be on that day. Pickett's division would form here on the right of the attack. So he'd be the right flank of of the body of men moving forward. He would then link to Pettigrew's division on his left. He would tie to Pettigrew's division with some brigades of Trimble's just behind him in support. But anyway, so Pickett's division is here. Kemper is right here. There goes the camera again. Kemper is right there. That's where those men are going to come out. Next to him is Garnett's going to come out right here. Get it right, David. It's been a long day. Richard Garnett's brigade is going to come out right here. So Kemper is next to him on the right. Kemper is on the right, Garnett is on the left. Behind them is Armistead in support. He's in a support second line behind Garnett. So there's hours and hours of stillness on that day. Nobody's really moving. The Federals have no intention of attacking. There's some action down on Culp's Hill, over there on the far right of the Union line, the Confederate left. But there's nothing happening here on the centre of the battlefield. So with those 28th Virginia laying in those woods, you don't know what thoughts are going through men's minds at that point. They knew that they were going to be sent in a frontal assault against Union line. That Union line was slightly uphill. Some of it was behind a stone wall, and it was well defended by artillery as well. But it wasn't the first time these men had gone into the attack. I mean, they were veterans. The 333 men here that were left, these were the ones that had not run away before. These are the ones that had not deserted. These are the ones that were not shirking behind. These are the ones that were always going to be here to fight alongside the man next to them. So, but that's a mile of open ground. When you walk that, it's a mile of open ground. I mean, I would have just hugged the ground and prayed that I didn't have to go. That would have been my reaction to it. I would not want to walk across that under artillery fire. But there was no desertion. There was no mass exodus of men fleeing to the rear. Garnett's brigade and the 28th Virginia would do their duty, do what was expected of them. So at 1 p.m, this gun line behind me is representative of the position. We're about 400 yards up from where that Lee statue is. This is about where Alexander placed the Confederate gun line. So that's Colonel E.P. Alexander. He's only 28 years old. He's the commander of the artillery here on that field. He places 138 guns on this section of battlefield. And at 1 p.m. he opens a massive cannonade against the Union centre. So he's focused all of his attention on that Union centre. He knows there's Union artillery there. His aim is to destroy the Union artillery. It's counter-battery fire. He's trying to destroy the Union artillery so that when his infantry go into the attack, when the Confederate infantry go into the attack, they will not be subject to artillery fire. So that's what he's trying to do. He's not trying to knock out infantry. Infantry can fight infantry. He's trying to knock out those Union guns. Well, the Union, the Federal gunners, they also then reply with themselves. So Alexander's firing at them, and suddenly he's got 120 Federal guns firing at him. Batteries firing at batteries, knocking each other out, whacking ammunition caissons, bringing down horses, bringing down men, etc. That artillery barrage goes on for a significant period of time until Alexander realises that he's running low on ammunition. He has to reserve some ammunition to support the infantry attack. So whatever he's destroyed up there, that's going to have to be it. If you actually look at, I uploaded a diagram. I uploaded a diagram to the Facebook page, which shows the location of Union batteries up there, all along Cemetery Ridge and up onto Little Round Top, the location of all those batteries, and then marks their fields of fire. And you can see on this open ground how those fields of fire from these batteries, 120 something guns, just intersect. There's really not a speck of ground out there that was not covered by Union artillery. But Confederate infantry were going to go into the attack anyway. That's what they've been ordered to do, and that's what was going to happen. So as the infantry sheltered here in the woods, in Spangler's Woods, some overshot from the Union artillery would land in the woods. So Garnett's brigade were already, on the 28th, were already taking some casualties in the woods without any ability to retaliate. And it wasn't until 3:15 that afternoon that Pickett finally gave the order for the men to move out of the woods, form their battle lines. So Garnett here, Kemper there, Armistead in the rear, and come out here, column forward, guide centre, follow that flag, and we're going that way. So the brigade moved forward. Union artillery opens up on the infantry. So they're firing explosive canister, not canister. They're firing spherical case. So if we have, what are these? These are 12 ounce. Oh no, there's these are 12-pounder Napoleons. Those are 10-pound Parrots. I don't see an ordnance rifle here, but anyway, up on the ridge there's a lot of ordnance rifle, 3-inch ordnance rifles, model 1861. If you've got a 3-inch ordnance rifle, 4 degrees of elevation, 5-second fuse, that shell will travel easily 1,500 yards and drop on these men right here. So you can be dropping explosive shells on them. Those rounds will explode and send out shell fragments in all directions. So they're already taking artillery fire from that. Major Nathaniel Wilson, so one of the field officers in the 28th Virginia of the MI class of 1861, he calls out, "Now boys, put your trust in God and follow me." Minutes later, he's fatally wounded, and his last words as he lays there on the field is, "Tell my mother I died a true soldier, and I hope to die a true Christian." So these are 12-pounder Napoleons, which were common on both sides. Spherical case from that as well, 3 degrees of elevation, 4-second fuse. That had a striking range of about 1,100 yards. So if we just start moving across this ground, across this first field to that first split rail fence, that's when now you're going to come within not just the ordnance rifle range, you're going to come within that smoothbore Napoleon range as well. So Garnett's brigade was getting pounded by artillery from the moment they stepped out of those trees. Whew, it's getting hot. Hang on a moment. Another hydration break. This video apparently sponsored by Deer Park. If anybody's watching from Deer Park and would like to sponsor me, sure, send me $3 and I'll go and buy Dunkin' Donuts coffee. If anybody from Dunkin' Donuts would like to sponsor me, I would just like a free coffee, thanks. So if you stand there up the angle, if you stand there up on Cemetery Ridge at the angle, that high water mark that the Confederates will reach, and you look across the ground back towards where we are. Now I've stood over there and watched a school party, a party of school kids, 8th graders, come across this field as part of a ranger program that they were doing. And if you stand way over there, you can see this sort of 30 kids. And they dip out of view, they come back up into view, they dip out of view and they come back up into view. So we should try that one time. We should get some people in high visibility vests to walk this ground so you can really see where they are, and stand up there on Cemetery Ridge and watch them as they rise and fall. So you can see as they rose, they would be very, very visible to artillery, and as they dipped, they might not be as visible to the artillery. But that demonstrates the value of terrain for concealment, particularly in the offence, because you want to take full advantage of moving through ground that cannot be fired upon. That improves your chances of the 28th Virginia reaching that line relatively unscathed, although they're going to be not unscathed, they're going to be heavily scathed, I guess. So the 28th reaches the Emmetsburg Road. You can see a few cars moving across there. It's usually a quiet road. And when they cross that Emmetsburg Road and they cross those split rail fences there, they're now within rifle range. So the reliable range of Springfield 1861 rifled musket firing that Manet ball, 500 yards. I mean, it's most effective within 300. It's the same today. I mean, most encounters are going to be, get your M4 out and sight that in at 250 metres or whatever you're sighting that in at. But most encounters are at a much closer range than extreme range. But when fired en masse, those Springfield muskets will do some damage at 500 yards. So as soon as they cross the Emmetsburg Road, and as soon as they are gathering at a split rail fence and climbing the split rail fence or concentrating in gaps and going through those gaps, they're within rifle range. When they close to within about 400 yards, they're now going to start to become not within spherical case. We're not going to be firing explosive case shot at them. The gun line up there is going to switch very quickly to firing canister. So we know what canister is. We've been through this before. Canister is a shell which is filled with tiny little balls and scrap metal sometimes, and whatever you can fit into this canister, and when you fire it, it just blasts out this giant cloud of iron and tears great holes in people, sort of turns the cannon into a giant shotgun basically. So they're now within rifle range and within canister range, so canister will be tearing holes in all of the formations, and the formations, including the 28th Virginia, begin to lose unit cohesion. So as field officers fall, so like colonels, lieutenant colonels, majors, etc., as the field officers fall, the regiments themselves are now without some direction. As company officers fall, obviously sergeants will come forward and lead the men forward at that point, because that's what happens in war. You don't think, oh God, the captain's dead, we'll just turn around and go back again. Someone's going to come forward and take over and continue that assault. But the units are going to start to lose unit cohesion. There's nobody there keeping them in line. They're going to be jumbled. Kemper's brigade is coming in. They're mixing now with Garnett's brigade. Armistead's brigade is right behind them. Those men are going to soon be in a mass there, just following whatever flag they can see and following whatever officer they can see, which is one of the reasons why Armistead puts his hat on this sword point, so that people can see this hat and this sword point and know that there's an officer there and follow this officer towards the wall. So the 28th Virginia is taking big casualties at this point. Captain Michael Spessard, Company C, he stops beside a casualty that's been knocked down beside him to give aid and comfort to this casualty, and realises that his son, it's his own son, Hezekiah. So he takes his canteen, his water canteen, passes it to his son, but rather than stay there, he moves on with his company. He has his duty to do. So despite his love and desire to take care of his son, he has to press forward with the company. So the survivors of the 28th, they're moving forward now with fixed bayonets towards that stone wall at the angle. And as I said, what was left of Garnett's brigade at this point, what's left of those 5 regiments in Garnett's brigade, is a confused mix of men from different regiments. But they reached that stone wall. They actually made it to the stone wall. Not in great numbers, but in significant enough numbers for it to be, well, now we're going to have to fight for possession of this stone wall. The Union didn't stop them all dead on this field. They weren't completely destroyed on this field. They reached the stone wall, and the Union force there would now have to defend that stone wall with rifle butt and bayonet and fist and rock and knife and biting and headbutting and kicking, and if you could clear your way out of the guns, those guns would load double canister and fire at 10 yards. So it's complete bloody mayhem up at that point. Garnett at this point is still mounted on Red Eye, still mounted on his horse, and he shouts as they approach the wall, "Faster men, faster, we're almost there." Hubris, because that exact point is which Garnett is mortally wounded, falls from his horse. So accounts vary whether he's either hit by a melee ball and struck and falls down, or whether he's hit by a canister blast which just blows him from the saddle. We don't know, because Garnett was mortally wounded, so we have no account from Garnett himself. Accounts also vary about whether Red Eye fell at the same time, or whether the riderless horse turned and returned towards Confederate lines without Garnett. I think in the movie Gettysburg, the horse is seen galloping back. I mean, that may just be, it could have been anybody's horse. A lot of the field officers were mounted that day. Kemper was also mounted. So it could have been anybody's horse, it could have been Garnett's horse. If he was hit by canister, the horse probably went down with him. If he was felled by musket ball, he would have been knocked from the saddle, but if he was hit by blast from a cannon firing canister, then assuredly the horse would have gone down with him. So, but we don't know. That's accounts differ on that point. So Private John Eakin, Company C, is carrying the 28th regimental colour. Its stars and bars flag. As he reaches the wall, he is shot through 3 times as he crosses that breastwork. 3 times. As he dies, he passes the colours to Private Graybill. Graybill advances, and then Graybill is shot down. At that point, the regimental commander himself, Colonel Allen, recovers the flag from the ground, because you do not want your flag to hit the ground. Recovers the flag, and he looks around and he hands it to the nearest officer, which is Lieutenant John Lee. John Lee's a young officer. He grabs the flag, he climbs atop the stone wall, so he's very conspicuous. He's a man in a uniform with a flag, standing on top of a wall where he can be seen by everybody. He's trying to encourage his men forward, but he becomes obviously a target for Union riflemen. But and also, so he's felled. I believe actually not. He's felled. I think he's taken down by canister as well. I don't think he's. I think he's swept aside by canister. Fell across the wall, still holding the flag, and he held on to those colours. He wasn't killed, injured, but it was taken prisoner, and the colours were then captured. So the 28th Virginia lost its flag. A group of Federal soldiers attacked Captain Spessard. They came in with bayonets, tried to fight them off with his sword. They knocked the sword from his hand, but Spessard, as you remember, had left his dying son out here on the field. He wasn't going to give up. He started picking up rocks and trying to fight them with rocks. And I mean, they could have just advanced and finished him off right there on the spot, but they were probably like, "This is a madman. We're going to leave him alone. He's fighting us with rocks." And so Spessard was actually able to get away and escape and return with survivors across the field that day. Other stories: Private Calvin Deering, Company G. He crosses the wall. As he crosses the wall, his own musket is hit by a Menable and knocked out of his hands, useless. He steeps down and grabs up another fallen comrade's musket and goes to fire it, but I believe it's accidentally got 2 rounds loaded in it instead of 1. The barrel explodes and it sends Deering in a backward somersault across the wall, wounded. He'll be taken prisoner. Union reinforcements are being thrown into the line. Hancock is sending in individual regiments as he can. The Vermont Brigade crosses the stone wall on the flank of the Confederates, so it comes around to the side of the Confederates and delivers enfilading fire into the Confederate forces from the sides. It's firing into them from the side. They're being fired at from the front and now being fired at from their right flank by Union infantry. So that's the Vermont Brigade. There's a nice big Vermont memorial up there on Cemetery Ridge. So Deering noted, Deering was captured, Private Deering was captured, that the Yankees were surely very nice to us. I think he was thankful that as a wounded man he'd been taken prisoner and that he was going to receive rudimentary medical attention in a field hospital somewhere, but he was going to receive medical attention for his wounds, that he'd be taken prisoner and at least he would be fed and reasonably well treated, and that he was not, like some of his comrades, lying dead on the battlefield itself. So he's lucky amongst those number of the 28th that were lucky, I guess, to be taken prisoner rather than killed or wounded. Colonel Allen had received a severe head wound. He slumps down beside Deering, takes off his hat, I guess to wipe his brow, and asks Deering what had happened to the colours. And before Deering can tell him that the flag has been captured, Colonel Allen dies right there on the spot. So the survivors of the 28th Virginia, that's those not captured, those not laying dead or wounded on the field, they actually begin now to fall back towards Confederate lines. Some on their own, some lightly wounded men stumbling back themselves, other men trying to carry wounded comrades with them, and some of those men acted with reckless bravery. So we have the story of John Martin of Company C. He went back out onto the field again and again, and he brought in 6 wounded comrades of the 28th. And he was going to go out again for a 7th time, but he was personally ordered by General Robert E. Lee, who'd been seeing what he'd been doing. He was personally ordered by General Robert E. Lee to stay off of that dangerous ground. So you had men that were going out and trying to retrieve wounded people. But the losses in the 28th were heavy. So Frank Field records that there were 28 killed, 86 wounded, and 105 men captured. So if we take Mark Atkins' figure of 333 men present for duty, bear in mind, math is not my strong point here. So 219, 33% is a casualty rate of 65.77%. I know that because I worked it out last night on a computer. I used a computer to do math and wrote it down here. 65.77%, so a little shy of 66%. 2/3 of the regiment were lost. Killed, wounded, missing, captured. 2/3, 66% casualty rate. That's horrendous. There were only 114 survivors present for duty at the end of that day. The regiment had lost its colonel. It had lost its colours. The flag was captured actually by Private Marshall Sherman of the 1st Minnesota. And today that is a prized possession on display of the Minnesota Historical Society. So there's a 17, if you go to the Minnesota Historical Society, there's a 17-page booklet you can download all about that flag and the capture of that flag and how it ended up in the museum there. And they're very proud that they captured it. Suffice it to say, it's been 158 years, and no matter how many times Virginia asks for that flag back, that flag's not coming back. Minnesota's going to hold on to that flag. So that was the 28th in Pickett's charge, and there are lots of other individual stories, but we could be here literally all day talking about them. I may post some follow-up video to this with like some other individual stories, such as Captain Holland being shot through the cheek but surviving, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, but I just want to keep moving on so we can get this maybe to under an hour, which would be a miracle for one of my tours. So that was July the 3rd and the 28th Virginia. July the 4th came and went, both sides licking their wounds. Lee did not want to press another attack. Meade did not want to press another attack. Both sides had been heavily bloodied during the previous 3 days. And so on the 5th of July, as it begins to rain, Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia begin that long retreat back home. So it wasn't until the end of July, as you know, we said it was in June that the 28th were camped down at Culpeper Courthouse. It's not until the end of July that the men are back down in Virginia and encamped at Somerset Ford on the Rapidan. And that's where the regiment starts to reform itself. It doesn't disband, even though it only had less than 114 men. So, barely just over a tenth of its authorised strength. The second in command, Lieutenant Colonel William Watts, a lawyer and banker from Roanoke County, is the second in command. He's promoted to colonel. Captain William Wingfield of Company G, VMI class of 1859. He's promoted lieutenant colonel, second in command. Captain Michael Spessard, as we know, he lost his son here that day. Company C was advanced to major. And in September, the brigade moves to Petersburg, Virginia, where it's essentially in reserve in September and into winter encampment of 1863, 1864. Some wounded men returned to duty. Men that were on furlough returned to duty. Some prisoners were exchanged. There was prisoner exchanges between the two armies. So some men were exchanged. The 28th tried to do some recruiting. And there's conscription in the south, so a few conscripts were added. And eventually that regiment would reform itself. It would never be up to full strength. But it would be back in action towards the end of the overland campaign at Cold Harbor in September of 1864. Pickett's division would be back in combat. Then they would be involved in the siege of Petersburg, that long siege of Petersburg. And then when the siege of Petersburg is broken, or begins to be broken, the 28th fight at the Battle of Five Forks, April the 1st, 1865. Actually, Pickett is commander at that battle. He commands all the Confederate forces at that battle. But the 28th fight there. They fight again at Sailor's Creek on April the 6th. And then at April the 9th, it's the end. They're at Appomattox. And they surrender with the Army of Northern Virginia at Appomattox. So as we talked about at the beginning, the strength of an infantry regiment could be anywhere when recruited from 800 to 1,000 men. So this regiment had been in service from 1861 to 1865, so 4 years. And after 4 years of service, the only members of the 28th that were left mustered for duty at Appomattox were 3 officers and 51 men. So 54 men total remained with the regiment all the way through to Appomattox. So, I mean, that's an incredible loss. So that really does conclude the battlefield tour. I wish we'd been able to do that live, and wish we'd been able to get that done live today. That would have been much more fun, but I fulfilled my promise. I came back out here. I delivered the content, so I hope that's been good for you. I hope you got some interesting information about Pickett and Garnett and the men of the 28th and the events of Pickett's charge. If you have questions, please ask them. Post them on the Facebook page. So that's facebook.com/walkingtheground, one word. You obviously got to the video content from that, so you know where that is. You can reach me on Twitter. It's @walkingground. There's no the in the middle, it's just at Walking Ground. Reach me on Twitter, you can send me a Facebook message direct. If you have any questions, any comments, please send them to me. If you enjoyed this today, despite the hiccups earlier this morning, please like the Facebook page. Sign up for new battlefield tours and events as I post those. If you really enjoy what I'm doing, I mean, I do these for free, but if you really enjoy what I'm doing, you can find me on coffee.com and you can buy me a cup of coffee. Buy me a $3 cup of coffee. Greatly appreciated. And that really pretty much concludes what we're doing today. So that was all of my notes. And thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again later.